Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man working as private security gets a job that scars him for life. So, no matter what you do, don't visit the Blue Roses and the Old Man.
I lost my job at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. I've worked in private security for years, mostly covering concerts, parades, and the occasional charity event. Needless to say, there wasn't much of any of that in 2020, so I was axed. I had a few backups lined up, but it just didn't pan out. No one was hiring, there was no opportunity for retraining. I could get started on a new education with my savings, but I figured I'd get a chance to come back to work within a few months anyway. Things took a turn for the worse when my mother was diagnosed with bone cancer. Suddenly, my plan to just sit this pandemic out got turned on its head. She needed all the help she could get, and my savings just wouldn't cover it. I needed at least a part-time job to make ends meet, something that gave me time to stay at home and take care of her. While my mom got worse, I spent most of my days at the doctor's office. They had to schedule her for surgery immediately, along with a chemo and physical therapy. I never got a good idea of how bad it was. They wouldn't even say 50-50. Then one day, while I was reading the classifieds, I was getting desperate, a woman approached me. She was in her early 50s, had a very business-like demeanor and short, blonde hair. She made a terrible first impression, looking like she wanted to rip the paper out of my hands and scold me. But that all fell away the instant she smiled at me. All she had to do was flash those pearly whites, and I could suddenly imagine her standing on a porch with a tray of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies.
Excuse me, I couldn't help noticing you were looking through the classifieds.
She smiled.
Do you mind me asking what line of work you're in?
No, of course, I nodded. Private security, ma'am.
Please, Leslie.
She chuckled. She held out a hand, but pulled it back. No handshakes in the pandemic. It was bad enough that she wasn't wearing a mask. Leslie Bolin? I asked. Councilwoman Leslie Bolin?
That's right.
She said, sitting down on a chair across from me.
And you are?
Emmett Marcus, I said. I worked security for many of Councilman Erling's events.
Erling? Then you must have a lot of experience.
I do. She glanced back down at the classifieds, then back up at me.
Erling was quite the character,
she said.
I bet you have some stories to tell.
Not about my clients, ma'am. Leslie gave me a long look. I wasn't flinching. You never talk shit about your clients.
Are you looking for a job, Emmett?
It all looked great on paper. It was part-time, but almost paid a full salary. Some flexible hours during the weekdays. The weekends would be booked solid. I was told there'd be a lot of downtime, and that I was merely a precaution. The only thing that worried me was that I wasn't given a precise location or even instruction. Two things were clear. I was to bring my own gun, and Councilwoman Bolin wasn't the one in need of protection. A few days later, I was invited to her home. I knew for a fact that she had a big family. I'd seen it on the posters around town back in her campaigning days. Still, as soon as I got to her house, I noticed something was off. The lawn wasn't cut, and there was only one car in the driveway. All the curtains were closed. As I parked my car, I saw Leslie standing in the doorway to greet me.
Sorry about the mess,
she said as I walked up to her.
I'm really counting on your discretion here.
She said it jokingly, but I had the feeling there was more to it. I just smiled back at her. Of course, Leslie. She showed me inside, and my concerns grew. Stacked takeout boxes littered the living room, and there were at least 8 empty wine bottles on the kitchen counter. I found myself blowing away fruit flies every few seconds, and I didn't even want to know what lurked under the carpets.
I'll be honest,
she said.
It's been a rough couple of weeks.
I understand, I said, trying to keep a straight face.
I'm separating from my husband.
She sighed.
Not publicly, yet. But it's happening. The kids are staying with him.
That's rough.
Yeah.
She nodded.
Rough.
I caught her eyes wandering off down the hall. She started walking, nodding for me to come along. We stopped outside the downstairs bedroom. A dry four-leaf clover hung above the door, some sort of childhood memorabilia. There was a flowery smell coming from the other side of the door, and I could hear a faint whooshing sound. Across the door was also the only new thing in this entire house, a sturdy bolt lock. It was installed to keep someone inside from coming out. That much was obvious.
I'll explain in a second.
She said.
Just be respectful.
Of course. The room was illuminated by nothing but a slit in the window. The room had a single window with some sort of metal sheet screwed across, allowing only a sliver of light inside. The room itself was sparsely decorated. Nothing but a queen-sized bed, a closet, an old mirror, and a bedside table. The whooshing sound was coming from a rotating ceiling fan, and the flowery smell was coming from the floor on the right side of the bed. Dozens of roses, so dry they were practically mummified. Still, it covered the room in a nice smell, covering up the smell of the one laying in the bed. Someone lying across from the old mirror, able to see themselves all the hours of the day. It was a very, very old man. He looked to be well past 90 years old, hairless, withered away, and barely breathing. There were no machines hooked up to him, no medication on the bedside table. Just closed eyes, shallow breaths, and practically no muscle left on his body. He stank of sweat and ammonia.
My dad, Oliver.
She said,
This is why you're here.
I think a nurse might be more appropriate. I'm not sure I can be of much use,
I don't need a nurse.
said Leslie, locking my eyes to hers.
I'm taking care of him. What I need is someone to make sure he and I are safe.
Are you expecting trouble?
All I need you to do is check in on him every 30 minutes or so. Be sure to turn on the light, or you won't see him breathing.
I'm sorry, but I need you to answer the question, I insisted. I can't help you if you're not telling me the full story,
He gets up sometimes.
sighed Leslie.
He gets up and he gets out, and he can get himself hurt.
This still sounds like the job for a nurse.
Do you want the job or not, Emmett?
She was dead serious. I wasn't sure about any of this, but I couldn't see any way I could say no. It seemed simple enough. I just nodded.
Good.
She smiled.
And remember to keep the door shut when you're not checking in on him. And if he starts knocking, just don't let him out. I'll deal with it when I get home.
I looked back on the door bolt. There was no way he was getting out without smashing the door or tearing the metal sheet off the window. And looking at those decrepit arms, I didn't expect that to happen any time soon. It became clear that Leslie just needed me during her off hours, while she was off at work. Apparently, she was having some sort of legal spat with a pharmaceutical company, and she had to work uncomfortable hours at times. I found it strange that I couldn't find anything about it in the local papers, and even stranger that she refused to talk about it. The only pharmaceutical company that even had a branch nearby had been shut down for decades. That first weekend with the elderly Oliver Bolin was the worst. I was to come in every night from Thursday to Sunday, about 5 hours at a time. I did exactly as I was told. I put a chair in the hallway and made sure to check the room at least once every 30 minutes. Unbolt the door, turn on the lights, check for breathing. That was it, over and over. I got so bored out of my mind that I started bringing pocketbooks to read on my Saturday shift. I didn't even bother hiding it, and Leslie didn't seem to mind. Hours on end with nothing but a close to comatose old man and a whooshing ceiling fan can drive anyone insane. Then came Sunday afternoon. Leslie had just been gone for little over an hour, and I was checking on Oliver for the second time of the day. As I turned on the lights, I recoiled. He was sitting up, staring straight ahead, into the mirror across the room. Mr. Bolin, I asked, are you okay? He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. He just leaned back into the bed and closed his eyes. There was something unnatural about the way he moved, almost mechanically. I made a note to tell Leslie about it when she got back. As I was leaving the room, I almost forgot to turn the lights off. As I reached the hallway, I turned around, only to see Oliver sitting upright again. But this time, he was looking at me. It felt predatory in a way, like he'd been caught in the act. I just turned off the lights and saw him lean back into the bed. It was the strangest thing. Even stranger was the roses by the bed. A few of them had turned blue. Leslie came back an hour later than expected, and wet as a dog. She was visibly stressed and seemed scared. She just pushed me out the door, mascara running from her eyes, and told me to come in extra the following day. I told her we should talk about Oliver, but she dismissed me.
I know.
She yelled.
Whatever it is, I know.
I started coming in 5 days a week, Thursday to Monday. It carried on for a little over a month, and I got pretty used to it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going to see him sitting up the next time I opened the door. He didn't, but it felt like there was always a chance. One night, Leslie was particularly late. I found myself dozing off, only to wake up when my book slipped out of my hands and hit the floor. I'd missed one of the 30-minute checkups. I bounced to my feet and hurried to the door. As I put my hand on the door bolt, I stopped, breathing. "Mr. Bolin," I said, "are you up?" There was a short silence, then a footstep. A big one. Not two or several, just one big footstep. Something felt wrong, and I put my hand on my gun. I opened the door. There he was, sleeping as always. Had I imagined it? That night seemed to carry on forever. As it was getting close to 2 in the morning, Leslie was still nowhere to be found. I tried calling her, but I got nothing. Not on her cell, not on her office phone, nothing. I even thought about calling her husband, but decided against it. Instead, I just tried doing my job for as long as I could. At 2:30, I got up to do another check. As I put my hand on the door, something touched my face. I blew it away, thinking it was another fruit fly, when I noticed something touching my hand. A single, tiny blue leaf. Looking up above the door, I noticed the dried 4-leaf clover had turned completely blue. I opened the door bolt and opened the door, only to have it stop against something. There was something heavy on the other side. 2 pushes later, and I realized it was the closet. How the hell did that old man move something that large and heavy without me noticing it? "Mr. Bolin!" I yelled out. "I'm coming in!" Step by step, I pushed the door open. I got it to open just enough to see that his bed was empty, and that all the bedside roses had turned blue. Their leaves were scattered across the floor as if someone had stepped on them. I powered through and shoved the door open. Mr. Bolin was standing in front of the metal sheet that covered the window. There was a loud pop as the corner screw was torn off. Mr. Bolin was just standing there in the dark. The whooshing noise was gone, as the ceiling fan had gone quiet. The lights didn't work, and there were traces of glass spread across the bed. Mr. Bolin, his arms were to his side. He wasn't pulling on the metal sheet, but it was still moving. He turned around. His face was stretched to the limit, and something was coming out of his mouth. It was as thick as my arm, and twice as long. A dark, slick surface, like a kind of oil. It dripped onto the floor, leaving blue marks along the way. It was some kind of arm or tentacle. Before I got the chance to speak, the arm split in 4. One grabbed the mirror, one grabbed the bed, and the other 2 stuck to the ceiling. They started swinging forward, holding Oliver Bolin like a macabre puppet. It was so fast. All those things moving towards me. Before I could get my gun out of my harness, he was already at the door. I stumbled backwards. The arms reached through the half-open door, only to get stuck by Oliver's frail body. It looked like a snail desperately trying to break free of its shell, or a snake trying to get loose from a bag. Right there in the middle of Oliver Bolin's wide-open mouth, I saw something white flashing by, an eye or a set of teeth. My pulse didn't know what to do and just started racing. It got so high that I barely even felt it, and I was forgetting to breathe. I got my gun out, safety off, and put myself in a firing position. It was only then that I realized I had no idea what to fire at. What was my target? That moment of hesitation allowed the thing to close in on me. It threw itself at me, tossing Oliver like a rag doll across the room, knocking over the empty bottles, slipping as it lost grip on the hallway carpet. I just ducked, and as it went over me, we traded places. It was standing between me and the exit. I dashed upstairs, hearing the smattering of something sticky as the limbs scrambled to regain balance. It just seemed so eager to get to me, like it was hungry or playful. Rushing up the stairs, I took a shot. I didn't even know what to aim for, I just wanted it to stay away. I must have hit something. It was a good shot, but nothing happened. Just a large bang. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom and backed away from the door. I heard some kind of squishy noise outside as tiny tentacles were reaching in from under and over the door. It was gonna rip the entire door straight off the hinges. As the wood began to creak, I opened the bathroom window, knocking over decorative soaps and porcelain figurines. I was about to throw myself out when I felt something tugging at my leg. I didn't look back, but the smell of ammonia was overwhelming. And in the midst of panic, a voice somewhere deep inside Oliver Bolin.
Hello?
Tried to pull me back. I held onto the window frame for dear life. As my shoe slipped off, I took my chance. I just fell from the second-story window, landing hard on the garage roof. I made big dent in the steel roof, tumbled off, and found myself flat on a gravel path, fresh out of breath. I pulled my shoulder and banged my head, but there was too much adrenaline for me to notice. I stumbled out to my car, threw myself in the driver's seat, and turned the key. As the headlights lit up, I saw Oliver Bolin in front of my car. He was being held up by at least 6 appendages, standing like a crab in the middle of the driveway. His eyes were flickering back and forth, like he was dreaming. As I put the car in reverse, I noticed I was screaming. I hadn't even noticed that I'd started. I was just screaming my heart out, and it wasn't even a conscious decision. I just had to get away, no matter the cost. I don't know if it chased me or if it just let me leave. I don't know what happened for the rest of that night. I just pushed down on the gas and put as much distance as I could between me and that godforsaken house. The next day, I found myself 2 towns over. With my left foot bare, I stopped at a gas station and asked to borrow their phone. I must have dropped mine somewhere during the chase. Probably when I pulled my gun. I still couldn't get a hold of Leslie, and at that point, I didn't know what to do. The whole night felt surreal, like something that had never really happened. Later that day, as I was driving back home, I heard it on the news. Leslie Bolin had gone missing. I just shut up about the whole thing. The pay Leslie had given me had been a bit hush-hush and under the table, and I didn't want to risk ever coming near that house again, for any reason. Besides, what if I'd accidentally shot Mr. Bolin that night? What if I'd just hallucinated? It would be comforting to imagine not having seen what I'd seen, but no, it happened. Not that long afterwards, I heard the reports that Leslie Bolin had been found dead. I think I have an idea of what killed her. I didn't earn much during my time with Leslie Bolin. I've earned enough to scrape by as I look for another job, and I get to enjoy what time I have left with my mom. She is getting progressively worse. I've spent most of my days caring for her in my home. And just a few days ago, the strangest thing happened. My aunt came by to visit my mom. We all had some coffee and cake, talked, watched movies, and spent the day together. Later that night, as my mom had fallen asleep, I noticed something on her bedside table. My aunt had brought her a vase full of tulips, beautiful red and golden flowers, her favorite colors.